welcome to the House of ZK Radio, which is a focused podcast and media channel exploring everything ZK, zero knowledge. I'm Alice, education lead at zkVM. Today I'm joined here with co-host Pavel, who's DevRel lead at Metis, and our very special guest, Justin, researcher at the Ethereum Foundation. Thank you very much for being here, Justin. We're very, very excited to have you.
Absolutely, and I'm also very excited to be here. ZK is one of the topics that actually got me into Ethereum, and it's something that's very close to my heart.
Oh, nice. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Maybe introduce yourself on how specifically you got into the ZK space, and then into the general like Ethereum and then Web3 spaces. Yeah,
sure. So I was a Bitcoiner for some time. I discovered Bitcoin in 2013. It was actually Dankrat Feist from the Dank sharding fame who introduced me to Bitcoin. And together we started the Bitcoin NTM, and then eventually I started a Bitcoin startup. And my startup didn't do so well, and I had a little bit of time on my hands, and I really wanted to go down the SNARK route to try and understand what this dark magic was all about. Dankrat and I actually studied mathematics here in the UK in Cambridge, and so I had some of the background with finite fields and whatnot. So I just took some time to learn about them. This was the early Zcash days. And I wrote a blog post on how we could potentially use the power of SNARKs. And it sounds crazy, but I think in 2017 I wrote about how there could be like this what I called Z Ethereum. So there was Zcash, and I was talking about Z Ethereum, which would basically be a version of Ethereum which had one precompile to verify SNARKs. And this is very, very much reminiscent of the native rollups direction that I'm sure we'll talk about, because ultimately, you have the full Turing completeness available in the context of SNARKs, and you just need very light verifiers to verify everything. And so what happened is that I shared my write-up with Eli Ben Sasson, and Eli invited me to a conference that he organized at the Technion in Israel. So I traveled there, and I remember meeting Zuko and Vitalik and also some of the people who ultimately became part of the Starkware. So there was Avihu, for example, and various others, and yeah, this is how I kind of got pilled on ZK. But then what happened is that when I joined the Ethereum Foundation, I spent most of my time looking at sharding initially, and then we went down the beacon chain route with consensus, and ZK has always been kind of in the background, an interest of mine. With this long-term vision of Z Ethereum, stuck in the back of my mind, and recently I've been super excited because of the big performance breaks that we've seen. Every year we seem to improve by 5 or 10x the performance, and one of the kind of accelerants towards eventually using SNARKs at layer 1 is, in my opinion, SNARK ASICs. So, I've kind of been fascinated by this idea of having custom silicon to accelerate the SNARK proving, and I gave a talk about that at I guess it's the ZK Summit 11 in Athens, and actually the Ethereum Foundation now has many different initiatives to accelerate ZK. So I think we have 4 initiatives. The first one is around formal verification. So we have this $20 million bug bounty program to formally verify the correctness of RISC-V zkVMs. In 2 days, so today's the 26th of November, and on the 28th we should have a new program basically to accelerate the cryptanalysis of Poseidon. So Dmitry Kovatovich is one of the inventors of Poseidon, and it's a fairly established and mature hash function now. It's 5 years old, and the idea is to try and provide bounties and organize workshops to harden it faster. What I'm hoping will happen is that in three or so years' time, Poseidon will be considered secure enough to use at layer 1. And there's a little piece of trivia here, which is that when Satoshi used SHA-256 in Bitcoin, SHA-256 was 8 years old. And when Vitalik chose Kitchak for Ethereum, Kitchak was also 8 years old. And in 3 years' time, Poseidon will also be 8 years old. So that seems like roughly the amount of time that we need to pass, and I'm hopeful that we will have this hash function be mature enough. And then the third initiative is ethproofs.org. So this is a website that only just a few days ago we have basically a landing page. It's just a teaser. There's not much on it, but the basic idea is to build L2 for zkVMs. So we have many different zkVM vendors, and we're going to invite each and every one of them to snarkify EVM blocks. And for each EVM block, there will be an opportunity to submit proofs and to disclose how many cents it costs you to generate the proof and how many seconds it took to generate the proof. And basically, there will be this friendly competition and leaderboard, and it's kind of a block explorer where you can enter a block number, and it will tell you what proofs were submitted, and you can verify them and download the proofs and use them for whatever use case you may have, whether that's a trustless smart wallet or two-way bridge or whatever it is. And then the final thing that I've been thinking about is potentially helping with the acceleration of SNARK proving ASICs. So it's possible that the Ethereum Foundation may fund basically the development of some of these ASICs, and I'm hoping that there will be some convergence around a specific ISA, and the reason is that that will allow us to specifically accelerate this one ISA for in the context of ASICs, where you need to be opinionated to get the maximum performance. And I'm very pleased to see that RISC-V seems to be like the de facto standard, industry standard, at least right now in 2024. There's these 7 teams, and yeah, I'm one of the ideas that I'm very excited about is native rollups, and there's kind of 2 ways to approach native rollups. There's the most straightforward, I guess, the most naive way, which is to expose a precompile for the zkVM within the EVM. But there's kind of this potentially more exciting path forward, which is to expose a lower level virtual machine than the EVM, for example, RISC-V. So you could have RISC-V native rollups, and that would do a couple of things. The first one is that it would allow pretty much any developer around the world that can write Rust code or C++ code or whatever it is that can compile down to RISC-V to make use of the power of Ethereum without necessarily needing to know Solidity. And the second thing is that it would allow us in some sense to gracefully shed all of the baggage and technical debt of the EVM. Because the EVM would still be basically there, but it would just be RISC-V bytecode, and then it could just be ossified as such, and like all of the innovation would happen at the RISC-V level.
Yeah, nice. And really liked how extensive your journey was, first getting started with Bitcoin and then taking that SNARK route during the early Zcash days, and then I remember you mentioned you also looked into sharding and then looked into Beacon Chain as well, with all in mind the Ethereum vision. So really like that. And you also mentioned that even we have these big performance breaks recently, say with SNARKs, and then also you mentioned all of these initiatives to accelerate zk. But I'm very curious to hear, despite like all of the developments that we have seen in the past couple of years, there's still quite a few challenges that relate to mainstream adoption with zk. So very curious to hear about what you believe are kind of the biggest challenges that currently exist in preventing that mainstream adoption for devs, and what specific challenges we should prioritize on addressing. So maybe it could be for developer experience, but we have also, as you mentioned, seen improvements with, say, RISC-V zkVMs, or if it's due to costs of proof generation. Just curious to hear about your thoughts on the main challenges that prevent or are currently preventing mainstream adoption as of right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the good news is that cost is no longer a bottleneck. Like there's, if you go on the SP1 website, for example, they'll tell you that the proving cost for a typical EVM transaction is now 1/10 of a cent, which is much less than you'd pay for the data availability cost. And I expect that to improve, orders of magnitude going forward. So this is a solved problem. The other, big issue is around developer friendliness. Like previously you had to be some sort of a circuit expert or SNARK expert. No longer the case, thanks to the zkVMs. I must say that I don't think we've totally solved this problem, because in recent days, there's been some developers who are interested in building Beam clients. Looking at these zkVMs, they played around, and they're finding all sorts of bugs and edge cases, and those are getting fixed. But this is totally normal, because zkVMs are in the early stages of being developed, and even some of the the big names out there, for example, Jolt, like they don't even have continuations or whatever you want to call it, like these segments that basically get patched together using folding or recursive proofs. Now, I think the key unlocks that need to happen still are, number one, dramatically reducing latency. So there's a lot of use cases that are bottlenecked by the fact that it takes many seconds, if not minutes, to generate these proofs. And one of the things that I'm very excited about is having trustless synchronous composability between two rollups. And in order to achieve that, we need this really fast, what I call real-time proving, and in particular, the proving needs to be sub-slot within the 12 seconds that we have on Ethereum, or whatever the slot time happens to be for these L2s. And then the other thing that needs to happen is security. We need to find a solution to security, because all of these systems are just immensely complex, and they all have critical bugs. And so in some sense, none of these systems are actually providing proofs. At best, they're providing like these hand wavy arguments that have security through obscurity, and ultimately it just takes a motivated entity, maybe entities like North Korea that will basically become experts in SNARKs just to try and break them. And the good news is that we have solutions to security. Solution number one is client diversity. So instead of putting all your eggs in one basket, you have, for example, 3 different implementations running in parallel. And it's very, very unlikely that there's a bug that affects all 3 clients at the same time. And this is the strategy that we would take, for example, with Ethereum layer 1, whether it's at the EVM level or at the consensus layer. And we kind of get this by construction, because every validator gets to choose which vendor, which client they use. And we, within Ethereum, we pride ourselves with this client diversity. And then the second approach that we have is basically formal verification, where we have systems that we can just analyze in their entirety and write mathematical proofs about the correctness. And one of the good pieces of good news here is that zkVMs help a lot, right? Because now we have just one system that can be analyzed for all applications, as opposed to the previous paradigm where every application had its own circuit that had to be separately audited. And then we have these new paradigms, for example, the lookup singularity, right? Where we're doing instead of writing these complicated circuits, we just work with these much more easier to audit lookup tables, and that's helpful. And there's all sorts of other techniques that I'm probably unaware of that basically simplify the complexity. And like one piece of good news on the security side of things is that we only need to audit the verifier, not the actual prover. And generally speaking, the verifiers are pretty simple, maybe like hundreds of thousands of lines of code. So I am optimistic that we can actually crack that nut, and this is what the $20 million formal verification effort at zkEVM-verify.org is all about.
Mm-hmm. So, in your view, costs or proving costs are no longer a problem or bottleneck anymore, and instead, kind of the main challenges that we have are with reducing latency, security. But you mentioned that there are currently solutions in place, like with client diversity, with formal verification, and then also more improvements on the developer friendly experience as well.
Yeah, exactly. So if you look at the developer friendliness, I think RiskZero have this this cool table that they generate on a daily basis, where they look at the top 1,000 crates and they see kind of which ones actually compile. And I think it's something like 700. But there's still today like limitations on the amount of memory that you're allowed to consume, and all sorts of other edge cases. And I think it's just a maturation process that needs to happen. The good news is that these teams have a lot of money. So I believe that RiskZero raised $40 million and SP1 raised $55 million. And if you take all of the zkVMs in combination, I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. And so from my perspective, for the Beam chain, I can, to a large extent, just sit back and relax and wait for this maturation to happen over the next few years.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And I'm also very curious to hear about your general thoughts on the ZK endgame. So in your perspective, do you believe that ZK will dominate, or can we expect, say, a combination of other cryptographic primitives, like we've been seeing a lot of MPC and FEG around becoming more prevalent? What are your thoughts on how ZK will play in the future?
Yeah, so when you zoom out and you look at cryptographic primitives, the distribution is extremely skewed towards the short tail, I guess. So you have hash functions and you have signature schemes that represent maybe, I don't know, I want to put a number on it, like 98% of use cases is just hash functions and signatures, and then that's what secures the web. And the cryptographers are very, very good at coming up with like these really fancy primitives that sometimes don't get used. Sorry, I guess I should retract my statement. It's hash functions, encryption, and signatures. I shouldn't forget encryption. Now, the amazing thing about zero-knowledge proofs is that they can themselves be used as a building block to build other primitives. So you mentioned MPC. SNARKs are used in the context of modern MPCs. And then FHE, that's the same thing here, right? Like if you want to prove that the FHE was done, the computation on top of the ciphertext was done correctly, then you would use a SNARK for that. And so like my intuition is that we do see SNARKs kind of eating cryptography in the sense that they become a commoditized building block, just like hash functions are. But I also see them kind of eating the world of computation. So one of my dreams, in some sense, is to have CPUs where there's an onboard prover that generates proofs in real time. So imagine that you have a RISC-V CPU or an ARM CPU or x86 CPU, and then for every X number of cycles, for example, X equals 1,000,000, it generates a proof in real time. And this is the kind of vision that I'm hoping we can accelerate potentially by providing funding from the Ethereum Foundation. And the way that you should think about it is that a CPU core can actually be very, very small. With modern fabrication processes, we're talking like maybe less than 1 square millimeter. So it's a very, very small piece of silicon. And then you will have the overhead of doing the proving, which could be, between, in the best case, I guess, between like 2 and 3 orders of magnitude greater. So you could imagine 100 square millimeters or maybe hundreds of square millimeters dedicated to just doing the proving. And now suddenly you've unlocked verifiable computing as a primitive that you can just buy, just a piece of hardware and put it in your data center or put it on your laptop or whatever it is. And I think, blockchains are the primary consumers of this verifiable computing, because we take this like maximally adversarial kind of perspective where like everyone's trying to attack us, and we need to be secure in a permissionless setting. But I think gradually this is going to grow to more and more industries. So the banking industry, I think, as soon as we have these verifiable CPUs, is very, very quickly is going to be mandated by regulators that all of our banking is basically verified. I think a similar thing could be said for the medical industry potentially, and maybe like AI, right? Like we're putting so much trust in AI, and it would be great if we can prove statements about them. In any case, I think directionally, I think you're right, Alice, that SNARKs are going to eat the world, and right now, the blockchain industry is willing to invest the hundreds of millions of dollars to make this a reality, but ultimately many other industries are going to reap the fruit.
Yeah, very excited to see zk and these other primitives being applied, and verifiable computation in general being applied to beyond blockchain and into these industries like what you mentioned, medical, banking, AI industries. Very exciting time we're in. Currently, we see a lot of, or zk being applied just within the Web3 context, but hopefully we'll see some real world applications as well. So very exciting time that we're in right now. I also wanted to flip down a bit and focus specifically on Beamchain. So your redesign proposal for Ethereum's consensus layer that you presented in DEF CON not too long ago. Very curious to hear how the Beamchain proposal aligns with Ethereum's official roadmap and long-term vision. I believe the roadmap was proposed back around a year ago, back in Q4 of 2023. So curious to hear about the specific subsets of this roadmap that can be accelerated with Beamchain, and maybe some new changes that were proposed that currently don't exist on the roadmap, and how Beamchain can prepare, how it compares to the kind of final envisioned design for Ethereum.
Yeah, so Ethereum has a bit of a strange relationship with the roadmap, in the sense that we don't technically have an official roadmap. It's more of an emergent kind of collective thing. And it's something that has evolved over time since the very beginning all the way to this day. And I think the document that you're referring is basically Vitalik's roadmap diagram, which in some sense is Vitalik's best effort to crystallize the roadmap and to try and extract the essence of the things for which we have reached the beginnings, at least, of rough consensus. Now, what the Beamchain is all about is not changing the contents of the roadmap, but instead changing two things about it. The first one is the way that the roadmap is presented, and secondly, the way that the roadmap is tackled from a strategic perspective in terms of how we do upgrades. So what the Beam chain does is that it kind of slices and dices the roadmap in a slightly different way. The way that Vitalik slices and dices things is with, the merge, the surge, the splurge, like all these parallel swim lanes. And the way that I think about it is instead of the three constituent layers of what makes the L1, what makes mainnet. So there's the consensus layer, the data layer, and the execution layer. So the consensus layer is what's currently the beacon chain. The data layer is what we know as dank sharding with the blobs and data availability. And then we have the execution layer, which is the EVM and the infrastructure around the EVM, such as the merkleization of the state. And what the Beam chain is all about is kind of focusing in on the consensus layer. And actually, this is where the name comes from. It's meant to signal continuity from the beacons of light in the beacon chain to the beams of light in the Beam chain. And what it's one of the, I guess the key feature of the consensus layer is all about health. So it's all about how do we make sure that Ethereum layer 1 is as secure as possible, as robust, and basically is the best possible platform to build the Internet of Value on and secure potentially tens of trillions, if not hundreds of trillions of dollars. And so the way that we've traditionally kind of made changes to the consensus layer is by having like these very slow and conservative upgrades. We've had one upgrade per year since the genesis of the beacon chain, and every time we have this like small incremental feature, which is not too risky. And what I've observed is basically the ambition of the roadmap is such that it would take potentially decades to complete the roadmap with these small incremental upgrades. And so what I'm basically suggesting is that we take the most ambitious items in the roadmap and rethink them from first principles, so that we are not slowed down by the we're not burdened by the past, right? To use a Camilla kind of quote, where we can move very fast and we're not burdened by essentially technical debt. Because what we've realized is that the beacon chain as it is today is just needlessly complicated, and if we want to make a small change, then it involves a lot of coordination overhead with all of the different clients. And it also comes with governance overhead, where we have to write an EIP and go through the Oracle devs and all of that. And so what I'm suggesting is that in parallel to the incremental changes that will happen in the next few years, we basically write from scratch a new spec, which would be much simpler than the existing beacon chain spec. And it would be like 10 times more powerful because it incorporates all of the latest and greatest ideas. And then when it's time to bring it to mainnet, we only go through this kind of lengthy EIP, Oracle devs testing process once, as opposed to having to go through it potentially a dozen times. And so I kind of think of it as an accelerationist effort. But in Ethereum timeframes, we're accelerating from 20 to 5 years, and it's not really meant to be an accelerationist effort in the very, very short term, and certainly not a response to competitive pressures like Solana. I think a lot of the community on Twitter were kind of expecting like some sort of like immediate and direct response to Solana. Some people were suggesting, for example, 1 second slot times. This is not at all the direction that I think Ethereum will go down. And the reason is that we want the L1 to be maximally secure and incredibly neutral, and all of the performance happens at a different layer of the stack. It happens with the L2s. And if we're looking at UX and slot times, there's this amazing innovation called pre-confirmations, whereby as a user, I don't know that there's a 12-second slot times at L1. And the reason is because I'm experiencing the UX of the L2s, which in the case of Arbitrum is 250 milliseconds. In the case of Optimism and Base is 2 seconds. And I think over the next few years, this is going to compress down to tens of milliseconds for all of the L2s. And so the L1 slot duration will, to a very large extent, just be abstracted away from a UX perspective.
Got it. And very curious also to hear why is Beam Chain specifically being proposed now? I believe that the initial kind of original design or idea was created a couple of years ago. But curious to hear about what sort of developments happened in the past couple of years that make the design feasible to pursue now.
Yeah, for sure. So, I've always been a little bit of a perfectionist, and so all of the technical debt that we've discovered over the years has kind of increasingly bothered me as a researcher, I guess. And it's now been 5 years since we froze the beacon chain design, and so we've had a lot of innovations that have happened since. And two that I would highlight is one, MEV. So when we designed the beacon chain, more than 5 years ago, there was no appreciation of MEV concretely. We didn't have this massive explosion of searchers and builders and relays and all of the crazy timing games and front running and back running. All of that stuff didn't exist, and so we didn't spend many cycles trying to defend against it. And now we have much better mechanisms that we want to put in place. And then the second thing that I'll highlight is basically the SNARKs becoming so much more powerful with the zkVMs that make it accessible to the developers, as well as the performance that is now good enough to be used at L1, as well as our appreciation for how we can make use of SNARKs safely, like the fact that the proofs can be gossiped off chain. And they would be kind of at the social layer chosen by the validators, as opposed to something which is enshrined in consensus. Because as soon as you enshrine SNARKs in consensus, you lose client diversity, and you need to go down the much harder path of formal verification. And yeah, like all of these things combined, basically prompted me to rethink the direction that we're going down. And I mean, one thing that I should highlight is that it's been 5 years since the beacon chain spec was frozen, but it's going to take several years to deliver the beam chain. And so all in all, we're talking about potentially 8, 9, 10 years of innovation, all condensed in this one big fork.
Got it. So like in terms of kind of like our developments in the past few years, better understanding of MEV, and then also some developments within SNARKs.
So just a follow-up question. You mentioned SNARKs specifically in terms of the roadmap. My understanding for SNARKs is that they have two limitations. One is that they require a trusted setup, and the other is that they're not quantum resistant. What would be what would be the choice of using SNARKs over STARKs?
Okay, so I actually believe that STARKs are a special type of SNARKs. Basically, you could say that they're transparent SNARKs. Now, technically speaking, the definition of STARK does not include the N, the non-interactive. And so you could imagine like some SNARKs that are interactive that are technically not SNARKs, but that doesn't happen in practice. Like in practice, all of the SNARKs that we talk about are actually SNARKs, like implicitly, and so they're kind of special types of SNARKs. In terms of why not use SNARKs? Yes, I think the SNARKs are great. Like we want our SNARKs to be transparent. We want them to be post-quantum secure. And actually, one thing I should stress is that the definition of SNARK does not does not give us post-quantum security. So you could have some SNARKs that are not post-quantum secure. This would be the case, for example, of Nova proofs, right? Like Nova is a SNARK, right? In the sense that it doesn't have a trusted setup, but it still uses elliptic curves and is not post-quantum secure. So I think, to be fair, like a lot of fuss is done, is put forward in terms of like the terminology around SNARKs and SNARKs. I just prefer SNARKs. That just seems to be like the simplest term that is most inclusive, and that is used by the whole community. I know that the Starkware people like really love when I say Stark, and I'm happy to use it in the right context, but ultimately I think SNARKs are kind of the more inclusive term. And over time, we're just going to have post-quantum SNARKs, and we're going to have more and more transparent SNARKs because those are just better. Now, going back to the beam chain, ultimately, it's going to be a decision point for the validators to decide which proofs they feel comfortable with. So the L1 does not prescribe any proof system. If you want to use transparent or non-transparent or post-quantum, not post-quantum, is going to be ultimately up to the decision of the validators, and in that sense, using the word SNARK, which is most inclusive, is what makes sense.
And then I do like the idea of providing validators with the choice of what kind of proofs they wish to use, and having that decision making go to them. Also very curious to hear about the implications of transitioning into this new like ZK era for consensus. So curious to hear, compared to previous approaches like with proof of work, current proof of stake, and then now transitioning into this ZK kind of era, are there any trade-offs that we should consider between all of these approaches, and what implications will come when we enter into this new era?
Yeah, so I do think that like there are these like generational designs for proof of consensus. So we started with Bitcoin, and even Ethereum had proof of work, and then we moved to proof of stake, and that gave us like some big improvements. One of the first ones is that we can dramatically reduce the cost of security. So issuance tends to be much lower. We get much more economic security for the amount of issuance. So one example here would be, Ethereum has about $100 billion of economic security, and we spend roughly 1 million ETH per year, which I guess is like $3.5 billion per year. In comparison, Bitcoin only has $10 billion of economic security, and it spends roughly as much, $10 billion in issuance per year, if not more. And so the ratios are just so much better for proof of stake. And then proof of stake has this other superpower, which is that if and when there is a 51% attack, we can identify the attacker and socially remove them from the equation. This is something that you can't do with proof of work. Like you can change the proof of work algorithm entirely, but that removes both the good guys and the bad guys. So it's kind of chemotherapy that kills the host, not just the cancer. Now, I do believe that we're entering this third wave of consensus innovation with zk, we've seen various projects do that. So, for example, I believe Mina, right, has a fully snarked chain, and that gives it like some superpowers. So, anyone consuming the Mina chain, needs very, very small amounts of resources. And there's many different entities that are consuming the chain. So one example would be wallets. And right now we have this strategy whereby if you want to consume the chain, for example, through MetaMask, you have to trust Infura, which is basically the backend provider of the blockchain data. And it's a totally like trust me bro relationship and like pinky promises. And I think we have an opportunity to change that. Another consumer of the chains would be bridges. So right now we have these like custodial bridges where we're basically trusting a custodian to bridge in and out of different L1s, and this is something that's not scalable, right? Like imagine having a bridge that holds $10 trillion of assets. That would just be really, really scary, and it would be a systemic risk for the whole industry if we have like an FTX type situation. But instead of a few $1 billion, it's trillions of dollars. So we want our bridges to be maximally trustless, and for that we're going to need SNARKs. And then there's the whole story around validator decentralization and solo validators. Like right now, I'm a validator at home, and I have a relatively terrible internet connection. And for this podcast, I actually had to turn off my node just so that the quality of the video is good enough. I have this setup where I have two terabytes of hard drive. And every once in a while, my whole disk space is used, so I have to delete my node, and I have to resync so that I kind of compact the state and whatnot. And this is just a pain in the neck that I'm willing to go through, just because I'm kind of this Ethereum enthusiast, but many people are not willing to go through. And the end game, the meme, is that eventually you'll be able to become a validator on your smartwatch. And that what I'm hoping will happen is that we'll be able to unlock a new golden era of solo validators. And that's going to come from dramatically reducing the consumption, the hardware required to be a validator, but also dramatically reducing the amount of ETH that you need to become a validator. So we're looking to reduce that from 32 ETH to just 1 ETH. And then there's this final really cool thing called PBS, Proposer Builder Separation, where as a validator, your main responsibility is to attest to the tip of the chain, as opposed to producing blocks. And almost all of the complexity is in the production of blocks. You need, if you want to be like a really good proposer, you have to play timing games, you have to pick your relays properly, you have to worry about pre-confirmations. But attestations is like the simplest thing in the world. You just look at the previous block. If it arrived on time, you vote yes. If it didn't arrive on time, you vote no, and that's the end of the story. And so the sophistication to become a validator will go way down, and SNARKs are a big part of that story. And then the other place where SNARKs get used is internally to the consensus. So the way that modern proof of stake consensus works is that you basically have tens of thousands of validators, and you want to have them each cast one vote and have this vote to be consumed by the chain. And if the voting is done through digital signatures, so you sign a message, and it's very, very expensive to verify tens of thousands of signatures within a few seconds. And so what you want to do is to so-called aggregate the signatures. And right now we have BLS signatures that provide aggregate signatures, but we also can do it with SNARKs. And that is the key to post-quantum security. And the way that I'm currently suggesting that we go forward is to use hash-based signatures. So that would be what the attesters would sign. So, for example, a Winternet signature, which is, if you know what Lamport signatures are, it's very similar to Lamport signatures. And then we would have a hash-based signature scheme, a hash-based SNARK to aggregate the signatures. And because we're using hashes everywhere, it's kind of, first of all, very elegant, right? Because we're potentially building all of the cryptography on Ethereum using just one hash function. But also it gives us post-quantum security. And finally, it also gives us this analysis of the security under what's called the random oracle model, or the quantum random oracle model. So basically, you can prove mathematical statements without any kind of fancy computational assumptions like the hardness of the discrete log or the hardness of lattice problems or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. And you've mentioned a lot about kind of the uses of SNARKs within the Beam chain, but I'm very curious to also hear about like the implementation side for addressing that kind of big ticket item of snarkifying the entire Beam chain. So curious to hear about any kind of technical prerequisites, developments needed in order for us to be able to snarkify the chain. So would it be only at a state where after we achieve, say, real-time proving or as close to real-time proving as possible, or adjusting any sort of necessary hash function signatures, any other sort of prerequisites, and perhaps even the involvement of, you mentioned previously, the involvement of zkVMs as well. So what's needed in order for us to achieve the snarkification of the chain?
Right. So we need several things. The first one is that we need security. And the strategy that we would take for security is the client diversity path, just because snarkifying a whole consensus layer is extremely complicated. And so the formal verification just seems too difficult of a path to take, or at least too slow of a path to take. Now, in order to get the diversity, we need to somehow make use of the diversity of the consensus clients. But the consensus clients are not SNARK experts. Like, they are Rust and Go and Java, programmers. They know nothing about SNARKs and circuits. And so zkVMs like kind of seem to be the perfect fit, where all of the heavy lifting is done by the zkVM. Now, the other thing that you mentioned is the need for real-time proving. Basically, what we want is an attester to be able to, when they attest, know that the block is valid, and that means that the tip of the chain needs to be proven to be valid. And what we need is basically sub-slot proving. So if we have 12-second slots or 4-second slots, then the proof needs to come within that many number of seconds. But in order to achieve this really low latency proving, what we would want, or quite likely as a prerequisite, is the consensus layer to be SNARK friendly. So we need all of the building blocks for the consensus layer to themselves be SNARK friendly, and that means changing the hash function from Ketchak to potentially Poseidon, changing the signature schemes to be hash friendly, changing the serialization of the data and the merkleization of the data to be SNARK friendly, and just picking up a lot of low hanging fruit from a SNARK friendliness standpoint. Because when we designed the beacon chain, we would not even remotely dreaming that it would be snarkified. And so there was very, very little effort in trying to make it SNARK friendly. But yeah, one of the big, dramatic changes from a SNARK friendliness standpoint is moving to a SNARK friendly hash function. And for that, we need at least one SNARK-friendly hash function that is performant and secure enough. And I think the only candidate, like the strong candidate that we have, is Poseidon. It's like one of the oldest. It's already 5 years old, and as I mentioned, hopefully it will be considered secure enough within 3 years. But if anyone has ideas in terms of accelerating the timelines or somehow putting more stress on the hash function, then please do contact me. One of the pieces of good news is that Poseidon is already securing billions of dollars through the ZK rollup. So in some sense, you can think of it as an organic bug bounty program. And I'm hoping that this will basically make people more comfortable with it in a few years' time.
And referring to just going back in, we talked a little bit about applying zkVM specifically for, say, snarkifying the chain, for specifically the consensus layer. Also curious to hear if they can also be applied to the other areas within Ethereum, like say with the execution layer, and when it comes to scaling, and what the implications look like there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I believe that all of Ethereum can be snarkified, and I kind of call it the ZK Ethereum, and let's see if that meme sticks. But if you zoom into ZK Ethereum, you have these three layers, right? You have the consensus layer, data layer, and execution layer. And it's kind of convenient because it's CDE, consensus, data, execution. And what I think we'll have is basically the ZK versions of each. So we'll have the zkCL, the zkDL, and the zkEL. And basically the zkCL is the beam chain. The zkEL is the native rollups where we snarkified all of Ethereum and then we expose the zkVM as a precompile so that the existing rollups that are EVM equivalent can just use this precompile. The benefits here are that it's almost no work, like it's one line of code to just use the precompile, as opposed to hand rolling your own snark circuit or your own fraud proof, which is very, very costly and from a human resource standpoint. You also don't get any bugs by construction, and the reason is that you have an exact copy of the L1. So you're literally equivalent without any chances of having divergences. And then the final exciting thing is that you don't need to have governance to stay in sync with the L1 when there is a change with a hard fork. So if there's a new opcode or whatever it is, then you always stay in sync. As I mentioned, there's two possibilities for the native rollups. We could either expose the zkVM or expose something lower level like zkRISC-V. And I want to explore this zkRISC-V approach because it to me seems like very elegant way to deal with the EVM baggage. But then there's also the zkDL, the data layer, where I think SNARKs can play an important role. And the reason is again, post-quantum security. So the way that we have blobs today is that we do the erasure coding using elliptic curves. We had this whole trusted setup, that involved, over 100,000 people contribute entropy and randomness to the trusted setup. All of that baggage needs to be replaced eventually to be post-quantum secure. And I think one possible outcome is that we have these post-quantum blobs that use hash-based SNARKs for the erasure coding. Basically, when you propose a blob, you do the erasure coding and you prove that the Merkle root of the whole erasure coded thing is correct using a hash-based SNARK or some other post-quantum SNARK.
So very exciting that we can anticipate SNARKs being incorporated in all these layers, not just within the consensus layer, but also within the DL and the EL as well. Yeah, nice. And just wanted to also scope out a bit and talk a bit about the roadmap as well. So what would the roadmap look like if Beamchain were to be implemented? And also curious to hear why in this case it'll take, as you anticipate, multiple years. And also curious to hear about some of the more challenging features that may need those couple of years to be implemented versus, say, like quick low-hanging fruit that can be implemented first.
Right. So one thing that I'd note first is that the L1 changes very, very slowly. We don't get anything done, faster than, let's say, a time frame of 1 year. And we already have a bunch of upgrades that are coming in these like faster time frames. And these are like very important upgrades that we want to push as quickly as possible. So one of them is called Max EB, where we increase the maximum size of the validators from 32 ETH to 2048 ETH. And that's going to allow the validators to consolidate, because today we have a million validators, but only 10,000 operators. And that creates all sorts of problems. So we want the operators to basically consolidate their validators into bigger validators. And that's going to be very healthy. Another big upgrade that's coming soon, not in the next fork, but the one after that, would be what's called Fossil. It's basically inclusion list for better censorship resistance. The basic idea here is that you have 16 validators, each of which propose inclusion list in their slot. And then you take the union of the inclusion list and you're forcing the builder to include those transactions in the blocks that they build. Otherwise, the block is just invalid and won't get accepted on chain. And the reason why inclusion lists are so important is because we have extremely high centralization at the MEV, in the MEV pipeline. There's only a couple of builders that build the vast majority of blocks. There's only a couple relays that relay the vast majority of blocks. And if these entities decide to censor, and some of them do censor, so for example, the blocks route relay does censor, then we'll be in kind of a very precarious situation. So there's a lot of important things that need to be done in the short term. And the Beam chain is kind of this long-term health update, right, for ultimately ossification of the chain and having infrastructure that can live for decades and centuries. And we don't want to be starving like the really important things that are going to happen in the short term. Now, what I think the community wants is, in addition to upgrades to the L1, just see the whole Ethereum ecosystem kind of fight some of the competitive pressures that we've seen from Solana. And this is all about performance. And I think this is going to happen at the L2. So the mental model that I have is that the L1 competes with Bitcoin. It's all about robustness, security, and moneyness. And then the L2s compete with Solana on performance. Now, what are the key performance metrics? The number one, latency. And number two is throughput. This is literally like what the Solana people, repeat over and over again, is like reduce latency, increase throughput. That's all we're trying to do. And the good news is that I think the L2s are just going to completely crush Solana on these two metrics. The first metrics, latency, they're going to crush because we have a completely different architecture where we make use of pre-confirmations as opposed to slot times. So Solana has these 400 millisecond slot times. It's very, very difficult to go from 400 milliseconds to 350 to 300 to 250, because eventually you kind of reach speed of light considerations and you're kind of really, really centralizing your validator set every time you reduce the slot time. But with pre-confirmations, you can have very long slot durations and still have this like really, really fast UX. So that's on the latency side of things. And then on the throughput side of things, Solana's vision is let's do everything on one box. Like let's put the whole incentive value on and process it through these server grade rigs, and that's just totally unscalable. And instead, like the sustainably scalable approach is to basically have multiple rollups that scale it horizontally, and the more load that we have, the more instances that we can spin up. And already today, if you go to rollup.wtf, you'll see that the aggregate throughput of all of the L2s combined is roughly 100 times that of the L1. And I wouldn't be surprised if next year it's 1,000 times, and then the year after that it's 10,000 times, and we can just scale that basically ad infinitum. Whereas Solana is going to hit a wall for throughput, just because there's only so many bytes that you can pack, that you can push through one single internet connection, and only so much computation that you can do on a single server. And so, when you zoom out, this is what we have. We have the L2s focusing on performance and ultimately, hopefully, winning in the short term. We have the medium term upgrades that are like important health upgrades that need to be done at L1, like inclusion lists and MaxiB and a whole slew of other ones that are happening at the execution layer and data layer. For example, increasing the number of blobs incrementally. And then you have the really long-term stuff that is more on the time frame of half a decade, but previously was on the time frame of decades, but now is only on the time frame of half a decade with things like the beam chain.
And I really like how you were able to scope that out. So first with the L2s focusing on performance, as you mentioned, and addressing latency and throughput, and then L1 health upgrades, and then overall vision with the beam chain as well. And really liked how you were able to tie that all together into that single vision. And I'm also curious to hear, but beyond the consensus layer, which we've been speaking about for the majority of this podcast with beam chain, curious to hear if there's also any current research being done for the other layers involved, like the execution layer and the data layer. We did briefly mention about SNARKs being applied to these layers as well, but curious to hear if down the line in the roadmap, if there's also current research being done in those areas as well.
So could you repeat the question? I was a little distracted. Are you asking if SNARKs can be used at the data layer and execution layer as well?
I was just asking, we previously discussed about SNARKs being used in those layers, but also curious to hear if there's any other types of research happening, specifically within those layers. So transitioning from just the consensus layer, which we've been speaking about for the majority of the time, to also the data and execution layers.
Okay, got it. So basically, stuff happening in those layers that is not directly attached to SNARKs. Okay, so actually, let me continue the story around the SNARKs, because there's still a lot of exciting stuff that I haven't mentioned. One of them is that once we've snarkified the EVM, even before we have native rollups, we can dramatically increase the gas limit. So today we have a 30 million gas per block limit, and the reason why we have it is because if a validator receives a block, then it's going to take, let's say in the worst case, 1 second to verify the block. And so if we were to raise the gas limit to 60 million gas, then it would take 2 seconds. And the more we raise it, the more we increase this denial of service vector, where it just takes too long to validate the block, and now the validators don't have enough time to know whether or not the tip of the chain that they're voting on is even valid. But once we have zkVM, what the validators can do is verify SNARKs, would just take like 1 millisecond to verify, and it doesn't matter what the gas limit is. All they care about is that the block is small in terms of number of bytes that I have to download, and that they have the proof of execution. And so one of the things that we need to do is basically have a separate limit for call data. So this is a bit of a technicality, but one way to consume gas on Ethereum is just to push data, and so and we just have one unified limit for both the data and for the execution. So once we have this separate limit for call data, which could be done, for example, with multidimensional EIP1559, but that's the detail, then what we can do is we can increase the limit for raw execution and keep the limit for call data relatively small. And so now the validators have the guarantee that they only have to download small blocks, and they can use the SNARKs to verify execution. And my guess is that we can increase the gas limit by 10, maybe 100, maybe even 1,000x. And the reason is that we have platforms out there, like MegaETH, and all sorts of other like high performance blockchains, as Rise, and they're not coming to mind right now, but there's many of them that are claiming to process tens of thousands, if not 100,000 transactions per second, and that is orders of magnitude more than what we're currently doing on L1. So ultimately, the performance bottleneck is not fundamental to the EVM. It's just that right now, even the weakest nodes, which are assumed to be running on Raspberry Pis, on home internet connections, need to be able to keep up with the throughput. But once we break this asymmetry, break the symmetry where we allow for asymmetry, where we can have like a super beefy prover and like these tiny validators on smartwatches, then actually, it's somewhat paradoxical, but even by reducing the power of the validators, we can increase the ultimate throughput that goes through the chain. Now, let's see, what else is there that I haven't mentioned? One of them is that I'm very excited about is stake capping. So right now we have this economic problem where everyone who holds ETH is ultimately economically incentivized to stake. And the reason is that regardless of the amount of ETH staked, there's always going to be at least 2% issuance, 2% APR for the validators. And so if you're a rational entity holding ETH, then you will eventually stake. And the downside of this is that there's basically several problems with everyone staking. The first one is that we would be overpaying for security. So we'd be spending, I guess, 2 million ETH per year just to secure the chain. Now, if ETH goes to $10,000 or $100,000, we're talking huge amounts of values that just go towards securing the chain. So if it's 2 million ETH and we have $100,000 ETH, that would be $200 billion per year to secure it. And the problem is that as a validator, when I receive issuance, I have to pay taxes. I have to pay income taxes, and different jurisdictions have different amounts of taxes. But there's some sort of blended global rate, which is at X%, let's say 30% or 35 or 40%, some number. And 35% of $200 billion is a lot of billions of dollars. That would ultimately be direct sell pressure just for paying taxes on nominal yield. Now the tragedy of everyone staking as well is that no one's gaining and everyone's losing. So the issuance that is basically diluting everyone equally, and so no one's really gaining, but everyone has to end up paying those taxes, and so it's a game where no one wins other than nation states in the form of taxes. Now, the other problem that we have with everyone staking is that it means that raw ETH, pristine ETH, will likely lose its dominance as a unit of account and as a unit of collateral in the context of DeFi. Instead, what will happen is that the liquid staking ETH, the STEs, for example, from Lido, might become dominant, and this might affect the moneyness of ETH. And the reason is that the STEF, the wrappers, basically break the credible neutrality of ETH, the asset. They introduce new security assumptions, new brands. There's like a governance risk, there's smart contract risk, and ultimately, if we want ETH, the asset, to gain like huge amounts of monetary premium, I think it's important that it can be used in a rational way, in its most pristine and purest form, most credibly neutral form, without kind of this economic forcing function of having to stake. And so, my personal kind of suggestion, and I think this is essentially rough consensus within the research team, is that we need to change the issuance curve. And one way to do it is to change it in such a way that the curve goes to 0% issuance at a certain cap. So if we want to cap, for example, the total amount of ETH stake to 50% of the total supply, well, as soon as 60 million ETH or so, which is half of 120 million ETH, is staked, then there wouldn't be any issuance, and the curve would gradually go down to zero as it becomes closer and closer to this cap. So this is an economic change more so than than a technical one. But ironically, it's one of the hardest changes to push out there. It's a one-line change of code, but the social layer makes it very, very difficult to change.
Mm-hmm. And really liked how you kind of acknowledged those economic changes as well as those technical as well. So having that balance of both. And just as a closing question, wondering how others can get involved with Beamchain or contribute to its progress, or if you have any sort of advice or main takeaways for the audience you'd like to speak about.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's this email address, beam.chain@ethereum.org, where you can express your interest. And I've been blown away by the amount of interest. So we've had roughly 100 people reach out in some form or another. We now have 12 different teams that want to build a Beam client. So there's the 5 existing teams, consensus client teams, and then there's 7 new ones. And then on top of these 7 new ones, there's about 50 individuals that have expressed an interest, mostly devs, expressed an interest in contributing and helping out. Now, just to set expectations, I think most of 2025 would be used towards speccing, and so this would mostly be a burden that is borne by the researchers, and the real heavy duty building would start in 2026 by the devs. And so what I'm thinking of doing, to keep the devs engaged in the period of 2025 is, maybe to have a monthly call, maybe a monthly Beam call or whatever it is, or maybe there could be a Beam retreat where we all come together for a few days, maybe a whole week, or maybe there could be some Beam days around the big conference events, whether that's EthCC or DevConnect or whatever it is, and hopefully 2025 can be used as a way to communicate some of the key concepts within the Beam chain and to lay the foundations. In addition to this, what I think may happen in 2025 is prototyping some of the most risky parts of the transition, especially around the aggregation of post-quantum signatures. So the big change with post-quantum signatures is that they're 10 times larger than BLS. So BLS is about 100 bytes per signature, and the Winternet signatures are about 1 kilobyte. And so that means that we're going to have to re-architect and redesign the way that we gossip and aggregate signatures. So if you are a peer-to-peer networking expert, especially a libp2p expert, do get in touch with me. And another exciting thing is that the way that the cryptography works for the aggregation is in some sense more flexible than BLS. And the reason is that you can take aggregates of aggregates recursively using recursive SNARKs, something that you can't really do with BLS. And so that's going to open up some new designs at the networking layer. But hopefully, assuming that we can de-risk this kind of new type of aggregation, and assuming that we are indeed successful in writing a spec that all the devs agree is just so much better than what we currently have, then the heavy duty building would start in early 2026.
Yeah, very exciting. And thank you so much, Justin, for being here, joining us today, and I really enjoyed hearing about applying Beamchain not only to the long-term vision for the Ethereum ecosystem, but then also you speaking about the implementable action items and some bottleneck trade-offs that we'll have to address along the way. So super exciting time that we're in, where we're finally able to innovate and build this. And again, thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Alice and Pavel.
Yeah, thank you.